Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the Holland Land Office Museum for our guest speaker series. We're happy to be doing it again in 2026.
Yeah.
We're very excited to have Mr. Joe Buscaglia with us tonight. I've had the pleasure of working with Joe on a few things. I get a lot of emails saying, hey, can you look this up? And we've been able to find most things, which has been very surprising because oftentimes those kind of requests end up in the ether. So, but thank you all for coming. I just want to acknowledge Tompkins Community Bank and the Batavia Rotary Club for helping sponsor the guest speaker and concert series for 2026, as well as GoArt. We received a grant through the Regrant Program. So if you're wondering why we're asking for suggested donations, we've gotten a lot of outside funding this year for this program.
Take it.
Yeah, yes, we're very happy for that. And we would like to acknowledge GoArt's support of the project, and that GoArt recognizes that this gathering takes place on the ancestral lands of the Seneca Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and acknowledges their enduring presence in this region. And with that, I'll let Joe take it away.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. I'd like to thank Brian for having me. Well, today I want to share a piece of local history that has remained largely untold for 150 years. It's a story that happened in the village of Williamsville, yet you'll never find it mentioned in history books or local lore. When we look at this historical marker, it's at Main and Evans in the village of Williamsville. But most people do not realize it refers to just one cantonment that General Smith had built. This marker is referring to the artillery cantonment that was later converted into a hospital. And it's outside of the village itself. But what far fewer people realize is that a second cantonment once stood right within the village itself. It begins in December of 1812 when General Smith had finally abandoned his plans to invade Canada, but a new enemy had arrived, winter. The season was far advanced and the troops were trapped at their encampment at Flint Hill. The conditions were terrible. Surviving only in canvas tents against the brutal weather, the men lacked the materials to build proper shelter. Disease and elements were claiming lives daily. Tragically, by the time the order finally came to relocate, nearly 100 men had already perished. And these are the fallen soldiers that are now buried in Delaware Park, if anybody's familiar with that. That's where the Flint Hill encampment was just outside of Delaware Park near Sisters Hospital. Well, desperate to save the remaining troops, General Smith dispatched 2 of his colonels to scout the surrounding region for a lifeline. 11 miles east of Buffalo, they found it, a small settlement known as 11 Mile Creek. With a sawmill and a reliable freshwater spring, it offered everything they needed to survive. General Smith wasted no time. He ordered construction to begin immediately. There was, however, one minor complication. The owner of the land wasn't home. The property belonged to Jonas Williams, who was currently away in Albany serving in the state legislature. Undeterred by his absence, Colonels Cole and Colonel Schuyler simply approached Mr. Williams' agent. They informed him that they intended to canton the consolidated 5th, 12th, 13th, and 20th regiments right there on the property. And they assured the agent that Mr. Williams would no doubt be compensated by the government for any damages. And then the work began. Colonel Schuyler ordered a detachment under Major Hike to clear the ground. Within days, the main body of the regiments followed to build hundreds of necessary winter huts. The soldiers didn't just trim the forest, They rapidly clear-cut the property, felling every single one of Jonas Williams' prized trees. Imagine the scene when Mr. Williams returned from Albany. He expected to come home to his quiet estate. Instead, he found his land stripped bare and occupied by an entire military cantonment. His choice timber had been chopped down to build huts. Williams was furious. He condemned the Army's actions in no measured terms, but the deed was done. The forest was gone, the troops were settled, and his only recourse was to file a claim against the United States government. Now, to understand how the cantonment fits into the early landscape, we need to start with the land itself. Jonas Williams purchased lot number 1 in Township 12, Range 7 from the Holland Land Company, a tract of roughly 300 acres. That single purchase would eventually become what we know today as the Village of Williamsville. So when we talk about soldiers encamping here in 1812, we're really talking about activity taking place at the very earliest footprint of the village. The land was still wilderness, still privately owned, and still decades away of becoming a community that anyone could recognize. So this is a map from the Holland Land Company, and right here is Lot 1. I've outlined it here, this red box. That's a 300-acre parcel that Jonas Williams bought, and it was all his. There was a sawmill on it and a grist mill at the time, but they were both non-functioning. So, to get a better idea, this is his 300-acre parcel in 1812. Now, this inset, I've blown it up and I've put it on top of a map of today, present day map. Now, this black, go back here, this black area here, Jonas Williams sold off 135 acres, almost everything east of Ellicott Creek, to Isaac Bowman in 1812. The rest of this green area, all through here, is Jonas Williams' property. And each one of these boxes are individual lots that he started to sell to build his village, because that was his intent. He was going to start a village there. So these were all privately owned village lots that he started to own after he had sold off 135 acres to the east. Well, practically everything east of Ellicott Creek. The blue line going through there is Ellicott Creek. So, one of the most important early sources that helps us understand the scale of the Williamsville encampment is the manuscript written by Timothy A. Hopkins, archived at the Buffalo History Museum. On one of its earliest pages, Hopkins recalls that shortly after the declaration of war, about 6,000 troops were ordered to Williamsville for winter quarters, and many of them remained there till the end of the war. He goes on to describe how the main body of soldiers was stationed on the north side of Main Street, with long rows of log barracks stretching from the spring, later the site of the brewery, almost to the creek. Hopkins also recounts a moment that when the troops arrived, Jonas Williams was away in Albany serving in the state legislature. And by the time he returned, he found that much of his best timber had been cut down to build the barracks. Hopkins notes that Williams protested vigorously, but there was little he could do except appeal to the federal government. And that's exactly what he did. Jonas Williams filed trespass claims against the United States government, and especially the two colonels, Colonel Schuyler and Colonel Coles. And he had him arrested.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
So, as a result of him filing this suit, I was able to locate 2 letters in the National Archive that pertain to his actions of having these 2 colonels arrested. The first letter is dated January 1st, 1814, and it's from Colonel Coles. And he sheds light on a legal battle that erupted over the use of Jonas Williams' land. In the letter, Coles explains that during the winter of 1812, he was ordered by General Smith through Colonel Parker to select a site near Williamsville and clear it for a cantonment. He describes choosing the spot, cutting the undergrowth, and erecting huts that housed the troops. But then he reveals the consequences of those actions. The landowner, Jonas Williams, filed a lawsuit against him for $7,000, a staggering sum at that time. Coles writes that because of this suit, he is now being held a close prisoner, waiting for the government to decide his fate. In a postscript, he identifies William by name and notes that this is the same man who had taken legal action involving Major Hike and the recent arrest of Colonel Schuyler. This letter is extraordinary because it confirms not only the location of the cantonment was on Williams' land, but it also the intensity of the dispute that followed. It gives a first-hand glimpse into the friction between military necessity and private property and the very real personal consequences faced by the officers involved. Now this is the second letter I found, and this is from Colonel Schuyler. And it was in the National Archives as well, and he's writing to the Secretary of War, who was James Madison at the time, on November 14, 1814. This document, which has only come to light recently, confirms beyond any doubt that Jonas Williams sued the U.S. Army for trespassing and that the military cantonment was indeed built on his land. In the letter, Schuyler explains that a lawsuit had been filed against him personally for constructing the cantonment at 11 Mile Creek in 1812. He notes that other officers are facing similar suits. Schuyler recounts how after General Smith abandoned his plans to invade Canada, the officers were ordered to hut for the winter. With the season already far advanced and no suitable building materials near the existing encampment at Flint Hill, the 11 Mile Creek site became, as he put it, a last resort. Schuyler describes going out with Coles to select the ground, informing Williams' agent that the troops intended to build there and that the government would compensate the owner for any damages. He then ordered Major Hike to begin clearing the land and preparing it for construction, with the regiment following shortly afterwards. By the time Schuyler wrote this letter in 1814, the cantonment had been occupied continuously by U.S. troops, and the damage to Williams' property was described as very considerable. Williams laid his claim at $6,000 with Schuyler. Now remember, with Coles, he said it was $7,000, so now I guess he's giving him some back. But $6,000, it was a substantial sum at that period anyways. And Schuyler closes by urging the government to intervene before the case reaches final judgment Supreme Court session scheduled for early January. This letter provides a first-hand account how the cantonment was established, why the location was chosen, and how the conflict with Jonas Williams unfolded. And if you go into any history books about this time and local history, no one ever mentions about Jonas Williams suing the government, this big legal battle, any of it. you read about Jonas Williams, they say, oh, he died penniless, and, you know, that was the end of the story. You know, he lost all his land in a sheriff's sale, and that was just simply not the case. So now, while all these lawsuits are going on, and military disputes are unfolding, something else was happening behind the scenes. Jonas Williams receives an offer from Jonas Stores and Company. And Jonas Stores and Company, they were a big mercantile company at the time in Buffalo. And they saw an opportunity with this cantonment being built. So they wanted to buy Jonas Williams' sawmill and his grist mill, and they were going to start milling and selling everything to the Army, they thought. Well, they offered Jonas Williams $15,000 for 2 parcels and his mills, and Jonas Williams took it. But the one caveat was they only gave him $5,000 in cash and put the rest, other $10,000 on a note. So on June 5th, 1814, Williams agrees to this sale, but he added a very important clause into the deed. And I found it in the deed. And it states that he was saving and reserving any right of action against anyone in the United States Army for anything they had already done on the property. In other words, even though he was selling the land, Jonas made sure he kept the right to pursue damages for the timber that had been cut, the land that had been cleared, and for any harm caused when the cantonment was built. Those rights stayed with him. They did not transfer to the new owners. So Jonas was pissed, and he wanted no one else to get his claim. It was his, and he was keeping it whether he sold it, and he had it written right in the deed with Joe's Stores. That small line in the deed tells us a great deal. It shows that Jonas Williams fully intended to continue his legal fight, and it confirms that the military use of his land was significant enough that he wanted those claims preserved, even as he walked away from the property itself. So in 1814, when he sold the land to Java Stores, now this is the Holland Land Company, but you can see how that inset has changed a bit there, the color, okay? So you still have Isaac Bowman, #1 there in black with all of his 135 acres. Now Jonas Williams' parcel is the #2 parcel. And you can see that it's a lot smaller than it was before because #4 is the Java Stores purchase, okay? The Java Stores purchase was 65.5 acres on the north side of Main Street and 65.5 acres on the south side of Main Street. And here it is here, all this purple is Java Stores, all this purple is Java Stores. He had the mill, all the mills, the grist mill, the sawmill. This right here, this little green area, that's Jonas Williams' tannery. He kept that part. And all the other ones. This is another lot that he hadn't sold yet. This is another lot that he hasn't sold yet. And then this is all his here. Now this yellow area is where the cantonment was built. And that Java Stores actually ended up getting, but Williams still had the right to any lawsuit that was going on to it, while he was fighting the government. So that's the area that the cantonment would have been built. Now, this inset provides an important visual reference. For one key, the land transaction, the early history, of course. And each color represents, like I said, who owns what at the time. And where the cantonment, I believe, would have been in this area. Now, before we move forward, they were huts that they were living in, not barracks. Now, like when most people think of barracks, they think of, like what they see on Stalag 13, or when they were, in boot camp, these long wooden buildings, something, but they weren't. These were These were little huts, and we have first-hand accounts. And my favorite one is one source, is a letter written by Lieutenant Patrick McDonald to his parents on December 12th, 1812. And this is when they first went into Jonas Williams land, and they came off of Flint Hill, and they were starting to build it. And he has a great first-hand account, and he writes, "We are now encamped in the woods, building huts, which we are expected to get into by the middle of next month." Now remember, this is almost the middle of December in Buffalo, and he's not planning to get into this hut for another month, middle of January. And he says, we expect to get into by the middle of next month. It is rather late into the season to be intense. We have a very handsome situation on 11 Mile Creek. The place is named after its owner, Colonel Williams of New York. I hear he contemplated building his house next spring on the very ground where we are building, and desired that not a piece of timber should be cut, as he wished it entirely shaded. But I can promise him that by that time there will not be a sapling standing within a mile of it. Now this is a beautiful first-hand account. Makes clear what the soldiers constructed and occupied huts, not barracks. These are individual huts. Now these huts, they would look similar to this. These are actually the huts from Valley Forge that Washington's men stayed in. So hut technology really didn't change that much, in 30 years. So they're basically the same thing. So this is what they would have looked like. They were 14 feet by 16 feet. They had a stone hearth at one end for a fireplace. And they would house 12 men in each one. And they were only 224 square feet. But compared to a tent, this was a palace, especially in the wintertime, right? So this is what they were living in. Not big, long barracks, but 14 by 16 foot. Exactly, with 12 men in each one. Now you have to remember, they had 5,000 to 6,000 men cantoned there. There are a lot of these huts, okay? So this is a layout of General von Steuben's camp layout. General von Steuben, he basically wrote all of the military manuals and regulations for Washington, and that's what they did. So when they laid out a camp or a cantonment, it would have been in this order. And depending on how many regiments there would have been, they would have been stacked up on each other. All right, so when we examine this 1854 village map, we're stepping back into one of the earliest visual records of this community. This is like the first map of Williamsville in 1854. The red outline highlights the area where I believe the cantonment once stood. Now, in Timothy Hopkins' manuscript, one of the clearest descriptions of the site in the manuscripts, he writes, "The main body was located on the north side of Main Street, and their barracks built of logs extended from the spring that the brewery has been built over up nearly to the creek." Well, right here is the brewery, okay? This is the John Dahl Brewery. And if you can see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's like a little line that goes through here, and it comes up through here, and goes here, and runs up here, and goes all the way up in here, and then that's the Spring Creek.
Yeah.
All right, and that's the brewery right here that they built the spring up that he's talking about. And that was one of the reasons why they chose Williamsville, because they had a freshwater spring. You're saying, oh, but Joe, they had Ellicott Creek, they could drink all the water. Your men drink creek water, they're gonna get sick. You gotta drink spring water. Because you don't know what they're doing upstream, or up the stream. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason was the sawmill, which was right over here. This was Jonas Williams sawmill over here. So he says that the cantonment is north of Main Street. Here's Main Street, built by the brewery in the spring, and then all the way down to the creek. Well, remember when I showed you the other map before? This map here is the 1880 map, and it even says right here, brewery. So we know that the brewery is right here. So all this time, from 1854, you can see this whole area here, it's empty. Nope, there's nothing going on in there, right? What's going on? It's owned by Phoebe Smith, and over here, who owns this? Oh, this is owned by T.A. Hopkins. He owned it. The guy that's writing all this, right? So he actually owned part of the cantonment that was down by the creek. Well, his description gives us a precise geographic clue. The barracks stood on the north side of Main Street, stretching from the spring that later covered the brewery up towards the creek. This alignment helps us match his narrative directly to the features visible in 1854 and the 1880 map, which I just showed you. Now, this is the 1880 map. Now, these are the lots that Jonas Williams had previously sold, already marked out. This is where the brewery is. This is where the spring is located, where the X is. And this is how the cantonment would have been laid out, just as he said. Now we see that it's owned by B. Miller, but T.A. Hopkins still owns this whole part of the land by the creek. But there's nothing going on in it. Why? What's going on with this area of the village? Why aren't people, building anything, or why aren't they selling anything? Actually, nothing really starts getting built in there until the 1920s. They start sectioning it off and selling lots. Well, so I was able to locate a newspaper article from January 26, 1876. Now, this is 1876. Everybody know what happened in 1876? It was the centennial.
Of the United States.
That's right, 100 years. The bicentennial was in 1976. This is 1876. And I locate this article from January 26, 1876. It's in the Buffalo Weekly Courier. And they announce a major federal initiative to finally honor the long-neglected remains of War of 1812 soldiers. Alexander J. Sheldon had been contacted by the War Department, this article says, to report on the locations of soldiers' graves throughout the region. The article outlined a partnership. If the city and citizens showed interest, the War Department promised to build monuments at 3 primary locations: Flint Hill, the Front, and notably Williamsville, where large numbers were known to be buried. Sheldon already knew of several mass graves, but he publicly appeals in this newspaper article for citizens to come forward with information on other forgotten graves so they could be included in the federal report. So Mr. Sheldon, he sends a letter to Timothy A. Hopkins. And this is the letter I found in the Hopkins paper at the Buffalo History Museum's archives. And it was amazing. I couldn't believe I found this. So now while combing through the Hopkins papers, I stumble across a correspondence that fundamentally changes everything we thought we knew about Williamsville and the War of 1812. It begins with a letter dated January 15th, 1876. So it's right before this article is posted. He writes this letter to Timothy Hopkins. So it's from Sheldon, the librarian of the Grosvenor Library. A week before the newspaper article came out, Timothy gets this letter. It says, so like the article states, the War Department had begun a massive task of gathering information on American soldiers from the War of 1812 and where they were buried, and to help compile his report, Sheldon reached out to Hopkins, the son of General Timothy S. Hopkins, seeking his first-hand knowledge as a longtime Amherst resident and son of the general. Now, Timothy was 6 years old in 1812. And by the time the war ended, he's 12. And then he grew up in Amherst and Williamsville his whole life. So he was running around these cantonments and, he knew everything about them. So, Sheldon believes that Williamsville held one of the burial grounds used during the conflict, but he needed accurate details before submitting his findings. In his letter, he asks Hopkins a series of questions. How many soldiers were buried there? Were they interred in coffins? Were they placed in a mass grave? Could any individual graves or enlisted men or officers be identified? And Sheldon notes that the government hoped to gather these sacred remains into a proper resting place and perhaps creating a site of beauty and remembrance. Well, just a few weeks after receiving that inquiry, I found Timothy Hopkins wrote a reply. And this is the reply he wrote. And this reply changed the course of my research. I mean, I was shocked. On February 10th, 1876, Timothy Hopkins sent back a detailed response. The letter is without question one of the most important pieces of evidence we possess regarding the village during the War of 1812. Hopkins begins by setting the scene, reminding Sheldon that 6,000 troops were ordered to Williamsville for winter quarters shortly after the declaration of war, and many remained there until the end of hostilities. But then he provides a truly remarkable detail. He explains that the main body of soldiers was stationed on the north side of Main Street and then almost casually drops a bombshell. Their burial place was in the rear of their quarters. Burial place? The only burial place I know of War of 1812 soldiers is on Arrow Drive by the airport, right? Is anybody familiar with that?
Yeah.
So now he's given us another burial location, but this one is in the village itself. Like I said, we know about the Garrison Cemetery on Arrow, but a burial behind the cantonment? Hopkins goes on to explain why we missed it. He notes that the land had been used for farming for more than 40 years after the war. By 1876, he writes, all visible traces of the grave have long since disappeared. That single line, though, their burial place was in the rear of their quarters, is extraordinary. It identifies the location of a second War of 1812 burial ground right in the village itself, because the other one is outside of the village. It's actually in Chippewa. So this letter doesn't just add a footnote to our research. It restores a piece of history that has been lost for generations. Learning of the Cantonment burial ground is a breakthrough of the highest order. So now, what happened? Well, Timothy Hopkins dies less than a month later than before he receives this letter. And then that's the end of the government report. So, I mean, there's a tragic twist to all of this. This vital information never made it to Washington. Tragically, soon after receiving the letter, Alexander Sheldon died. The Buffalo Post reported his death on Thursday, March 23rd, 1876. Mr. Sheldon passed away in his residence on Fulton Street. With his death, the War Department project for the War of 1812 soldiers died with it. The monuments at Williamsville were never built, and Hopkins' revelations about the burial ground behind the cantonment was filed away in an archive, gathering dust for 150 years. Now I believe it's imperative that we finish the work Sheldon started to identify this site and dedicate ourselves to restoring its sacred landscape for future generations. Now, I'd like you to take a look at this. This right here is a LiDAR image of the area, okay? And this right here is the, oops, I'm sorry, let me go back. This right here is the cantonment area that I had outlined where I told you where. This right here is Spring Street, and right here you can see where, look, this is where the spring cut through everything. And that's amazing. So you can see here how all of this is houses and everything. But do you remember what Timothy Hopkins said? The graves have been destroyed by farming for over 40 years behind the cantonment, right? What do you see up here? Look at all these plow furrows still in the ground. Well, if you look on an aerial shot of that, you can't see any of it. You just see grass and all of that. But with the LiDAR, it strips all of that away. And you get to see the scars in the soil from the plow furrows. So they're all here. You see these parallel lines up here? Can you see them? And then here's the creek bed. This is Ellicott Creek going right here. Kind of similar to how it is off of Arrow Drive, if anybody's familiar with the cemetery at Arrow. The cemetery is just right across the road from Ellicott Creek. And here we have plow furrows going right across the road, right across the area from Ellicott Creek. So I believe that in this area somewhere is probably where that lost burial ground is. But here's the even better news. If we look at this, this is a present day aerial shot of the area, okay? And you can't see the plow, the plow furrows or anything around. It's just all grass. But there are no houses, there are no roads. Nothing's been built over there to destroy those graves. So they're still, and this is the best part. This right here is all part of Amherst State Park, right? So it's protected. But somewhere back in here is a graveyard of dead American soldiers. Now, what happened with Jonas Williams and his lawsuit? Right? Well, finally we must ask, what became of the dispute between Jonas Williams and the United States government? It took years for the wheels of bureaucracy to turn as usual. It wasn't until January 26, 1821 that Jonas Williams' claim finally reached Congress. But there was a cruel twist to this timing. The petition was formally considered and rejected nearly 2 years after Jonas Williams had already passed away. His long pursuit for damages was brought to a definite close, leaving his estate with absolutely nothing. Not $1 for his lost timber, not 1 cent for the occupation of his land, and certainly not a thank you. That's my story. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Was Williams an actual colonel? Was he a...
No, he wasn't. He was actually a lieutenant in the militia.
He wasn't very patriotic.
Well, that's to be said.
What was the cantonment?
The cantonment is what you, like a fort or an encampment. That was that's what they called them back then.
There was a Garrison Road. Is that connected with Garrison Road in Williamsville? Is there any connection there?
Yes, that's where the artillery cantonment was in the general hospital. Now, there were 2 cantonments, but that was outside of Williamsville, and that's another presentation I have as well. Maybe Ryan will have me back for the hospital cantonment.
Did any of those soldiers actually fight? Or were
Mo-
they just
Most,
stationed there?
most of them died from diseases. Yeah, it's sicknesses and diseases. The ones that died at the hospital cantonment off of Garrison Road, some of them had died from wounds that were received in battle. Yes, sir.
Were those regular army or were they militia?
Both. Both were encamped there.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, is there going to be any proposal to try to locate the actual grave, maybe with ground penetrating radar?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. You guys are the first people to hear this. This is the first presentation that I've done on my research on this project. Nobody else has heard of this. This is the first, you're the first.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Do you have a guess?
Yes, sir.
What modern roads are border that area?
Oh, Glen Avenue, I've got them marked here, I'll show you here. Right here is Reese Street, right here. This is Reese, this is Main Street.
Okay.
This is Reese Street, and this is, right here is where the Williamsville Cemetery is, if you're familiar with the area. Okay? And then this is Glen Ave,
Right beside.
and then it goes over here, and this is the bridge that goes over the creek, and here's the falls. Glen Park is here, right? This is, what's the name? I think it's Edward Street. I'll go back here, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's see here, Glen Ave, Howard, and then this is North Cayuga here. This is Howard, this is Glen Ave, this is Grove, and this is West Spring Street and Grove, Reese Street, North Cayuga, and then Rock Street. And then this right here is where the sawmill is. Right now, it's Sweet Jenny's, it's called. And then here's the Eagle House right here.
Okay.
So that's the
And
street.
that's all owned by it's owned by Amherst Town, the township owns that?
No, the state owns
The
it.
state owns it?
Yes, it's New York State, or it's Amherst State Park. So it's a state park.
Do you think there's a
Yes.
lot of bodies there?
Oh,
Did you go to the National Archives or did you find this stuff online?
no, I found it online on the National Archives website.
Okay, oh.
Do you think there's a lot of bodies there though, or wouldn't they have got the record?
I would, unfortunately, no, they don't have the records for the dead there.
Oh.
They have the records for the ones that are on Arrow Drive, because they died in the hospital. These men died in the cantonment. So if they had any record of them dying where it said, oh, this, soldier in his papers, oh, he died at the cantonment at Williamsville, then most likely he was buried back in there. But I haven't come across the records. They would be individual records. They wouldn't be like a hospital log that showed the dead like they do for the Garrison Cemetery on Arrow.
The Garrison Cemetery on Arrow, they were from that when they were in a hospital and then they got buried there?
Yes, yeah, the Garrison Road, well, it's not the Garrison Road, it's the Arrow Drive, but it's the Garrison Cemetery.
Yeah.
They died first it was the artillery cantonment, and then when the artillery went back to war in the spring of 13, they abandoned those huts, and they repurposed them as a hospital. And then in the following year of July of 1814, they actually built a general hospital not far from where the cantonment was to take care of the soldiers.
The general hospital soldiers are the ones that are alive.
The general hospital and the ones that were in the abandoned artillery cantonment are buried on Arrow. And the reason they're buried on Arrow and not on Garrison or in the Lund Springs area is because Raphael Cook, who was leasing the land from Jacob Frick at the time, in the lease it says, will not suffer a burial ground The US government actually leased 90 acres of land there from Raphael Cook for $500 every 3 months. And the stipulation was that they couldn't bury anybody on the property. And that's because he was renting the land from the Frick family. So that's why they're over on Arrow Drive.
So was the artillery cantonment down around the Len Springs area?
Yes.
Just outside the border of Williamsville?
Yes, exactly. And they were cantoned over there because of Len Springs. They had all the fresh water they needed. That's why, and that's why the hospital wasn't built very far from that as well either. The hospital is probably less than a 1/16 of a mile from Len Springs.
Where it says mill race, right, up above.
Yes.
Can you go back to the LiDAR one now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
It's not there, is it?
It's covered by this red line. See,
Oh,
here's
okay.
part of it right here.
So you're saying that the cemetery would be on the other side of the creek, or the?
No. The cemetery, I believe, would be in this area over here, because they said it was behind the cantonment. And if you go by how they buried them on Arrow Drive near the creek and all of that, they took that area. I would think that they would have been buried right over here. And you can even see where all the plow furrows are, as Timothy Hopkins mentioned. But actually, they could be anywhere back here, you know? They could be anywhere.
Has anyone doused for those graves, or is it just,
No.
it's too big?
No, I've only gotten this within the last year.
Oh,
So now do we contact New York State, talk to Doug Pirelli, AUB, and see if we can go and do some
You sure
investigation?
could.
Looks like we have a project.
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll dig with it.
Anything else? All right, well, thank you.
Well, thank you again, Joe, for coming to present. So you guys were the inaugural audience. I hope you're proud of it.
Thank you.
And we'll probably have Joe back again. We have plenty of information to talk about. So I want to thank everybody again for coming out. Just a quick little PSA of some upcoming events. We have our next Java with Joe next Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Rachel Bellis, who is our new curator, will be presenting on mourning and mourning clothing at the White House, which is actually based off of a virtual exhibit she did for the White House Historical Society. And then for next month, our guest speakers, we have two. They are back-to-back. On Wednesday, March 18th, we have Holly Watson, who is the Livingston County historian. She will be here presenting on the Sullivan campaign. And then the following night, we have Chris Mikowski, who a lot of you may know from his Civil War history, just wrote a book on John Adams and is going to present on that, called Atlas of Independence. So hope to see you next week. We also have a lot of other events going on. Check the website, Facebook. Give me a call. I'll be happy to tell you what's going on. So you guys have a good night. Take a cookie, take some coffee, whatever.
Yeah, say one more thing. Oh, I forgot. All my books on this are on Amazon. So if you just put in J.A. Buscaglia, not Leo Buscaglia, you'll get a totally different thing. J.A. All my books are on there. And I'll have this book coming out
Went to grade school with
about this next month.